So I gotta be honest with you, when I first saw this proposition for the hostage deal, 4 or 5 days of a ceasefire in exchange for a couple tens of hostages and kidnap, I thought it's a bad idea for the Israelis. I thought it's gonna be a W for Hamas if this deal goes through. But now, given what I've seen in the past 24 hours, I think this hostage deal actually turned out as a huge L for Hamas. I think Hamas lost this deal, and in more ways than one. Let me explain. Now, as you know, on this channel, I don't conform to the mainstream media narrative. I'm not here to support any specific opinion or any specific narrative. I like to look behind the scenes, behind the BS narrative they tell me, my bedtime story at 8 p.m. on the news, and I like to look at what actually is going on. And this deal is actually really interesting. Think about it. When Hamas launched the October 7th massacre, it had two goals in mind. Goal number one, as now everybody knows, and as I reported immediately when this thing started, was to push away the possibility of normalization between the Israelis and the Saudis. That was about to happen. The idea was, let's hit the Israelis hard so that when they retaliate, we get to cry, oh my God, they're killing us. And then the Saudis won't have the street cred to actually go through with the peace deal with Israel. Now, that has failed, and I'll talk about that in a second. The secondary goal was to effectively push the Israelis away from the border with Gaza. So Gaza, for Hamas, is nothing but an outpost. They look at Gaza, they don't care about the civilians there. They look at Gaza as a front outpost for the entire country of Israel. They're thinking to themselves, look, if we strike hard next to the border with Gaza and strike at all these kibbutz, all these little towns, all these villages right next to our border with Gaza, then the Israelis would never come back there. They will all run away. The military will have to supervise the area, but the Israeli people will never come to live there ever again. That way, effectively, we will be pushing the borders away from Gaza towards Israel. And we don't mind sacrificing our own population, tens of thousands of them, if needed, to get this done, because that's just the end game. Now, initially, that would seem like a very reasonable goal, because who in their right mind would come back to live in these towns on the border next to genocidal maniacs that can come any second and kill you? But guess what? Yesterday, we heard that about 70% of the people who got evacuated from all of these towns intend to come back. So that didn't work. The Israelis are crazy. They want to go back there. So they couldn't push the Israelis away from the border. They couldn't scare them off. And they couldn't scare off Saudi from doing a peace deal with the Israelis. Not because the Saudis are in love with the Israelis, because the interests geopolitically are aligned for the Saudis and the Israelis to be best friends. So now that their first two goals have failed, the Saudis and the Israelis are moving forward. The Israelis are not running away, not from Israel and not from the border towns. They've moved to the third objective. The third objective basically is divided into two parts. Survive as an organization, Hamas that is, and number two, cause a divide inside the Israeli society to basically divide and conquer. Now, the survival of Hamas and the causing of this division in the Israeli society is dependent on some big players cooperating with Hamas. Now, Qatar is a huge player in this. Qatar, and make no mistake about it, Qatar is playing a very dangerous double game with the US and with Hamas and with Iran. Qatar is literally trying to save Hamas with this deal. The idea for this deal is that it's going to allow the Hamas to actually reorganize, resupply, and get better prepared, but more importantly, that it's going to allow Hamas to potentially not to fight ever again, because after a few days of a ceasefire, there's a good chance that the Israelis will not ever resume because of international pressure, maybe even pressure from home of people in Israel saying, we don't want this war. So this is opportunity number one. Now, opportunity number two was to cause a divide in the Israeli society. When you offer the Israeli society this deal, 50 hostages for 4 days of ceasefire, but there's still 150 hostages that are still captive. What you're going to do is you're going to cause essentially a divide. And the leader of Hamas, Yahya Sinwar, who speaks fluent Hebrew, he knows the Israeli society A to Z. He's been through the Israeli prison system. He understands the Israelis. So his thought process was, look, I'm going to throw this really shitty deal. And because it's so shitty, it's going to cause such a mayhem inside the Israeli society. It's going to implode from inside. Essentially, what he's banking on is that the Israeli society is going to revert to what it was before October 7th. Because for those of you who haven't learned Middle Eastern history and politics and, current events, Israel was on the verge of a civil war before this. Before October 7th, Israel was fighting internally. Internal politics was a hot mess. It was literally on the brink of civil war. And the idea was that if he throws this deal into the Israeli public, it's like throwing a grenade. They're going to go at each other's throat. The people who want the deal, the people who think that the deal is a bad idea, that there should not be a ceasefire. Yes, ceasefire, bring the hostages. No, let's get pushing the Hamas. And that's going to cause the Israelis to eat each other from inside, protests, chaos, absolute insanity, and basically divide the Israeli civilian society, right? The politics. Now, the crazy part about this is the first thing the Israelis have said once this thing started, that they've coordinated with the United States and with the rest of the global community. And the minute the ceasefire ends, the fighting continues, the war continues. The stated goal of this war have not changed. The parameter is to destroy Hamas. That is not changing. So they've already stated we have zero plans of stopping after the ceasefire. Basically telling the international community, the United States, hey, we're moving forward with this. So the first goal of saving Hamas right now, and of course things can change in the next few days, but right now seems like it didn't really pan out. But I think the more important goal here was basically for Hamas and Yahya Sinwar, their leader, is to cause chaos inside the Israeli society. Now, I'm not going to tell you there were not debates and disagreements. There were definitely people who thought that, no, it's a bad deal. People who thought it's a good deal. People who said, well, it's a bad deal, but let's take it because there are kids involved. 53 women, children. We have to take this, right? So there were a lot of debating going on. And that's the beauty of democracy, that nobody gets to shut up. Everybody gets to voice their opinions. But at the end of the day, there were no riots, no protests, no divide. The Israeli society basically came together and said, hey, we understand this is a shitty deal. It's the best one we got on the table right now, and we'll take it. And it's okay to disagree, but at the end of the day, they all merged into one holistic society which accepted this deal. The government voted on it. There were no riots, no issues, and now the deal is basically going through. The quietness in which it happened, I'm sure, was not expected on the Hamas side. They expected a lot more chaos. But I think what Sinwar and the leadership of Hamas failed to understand here is once they carried out the atrocities of October 7th, and I'm not sure that Sinwar and Hamas intended for the terrorists that they've used to go this far. Maybe they overdid it, maybe not, I don't know. But the fact of the matter is, the atrocity that they've caused on October 7th, the sheer magnitude of the killing of civilians and the total insanity that they've done, basically merged the Israeli society all together. They healed all wounds. Now, the divide is gone. Now, it's a one single unit. They, of course, have disagreements. And on the fringe, there's definitely crazies on either side. But 80% of the Israeli society is now basically one thing. And that one thing is operating together like a huge wrecking ball coming for Hamas. Because what I think Sinwar failed to understand here is that the Israelis got one thing right now. Now they understand, after October 7th, they either hang together or they hang separately. See you next video.